January 3rd, 2026, 2 in the morning. The United States launches Operation Absolute Resolve. 150 aircraft, Delta Force operators. Strikes across 4 Venezuelan states. Within hours, Nicolas Maduro is in American custody. And then the President of the United States said this: "We're going to be taking a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground. They stole our oil." Not "we're restoring democracy." Not "we're liberating the Venezuelan people." They stole our oil. For years you've been told this was about human rights, about freedom, about a dictator who needed to go. But what if the dictator was just in the way? What if the real story was always about what's underneath Venezuela? This is that story. And I'm going to show you the evidence they hoped you'd forget, from their own words, their own documents, their own admissions on camera. Now, I should be clear. Maduro's not a good guy. He was indicted for narco-terrorism. His security forces killed thousands. He almost certainly stole an election. But here's the thing. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. 0 elections. Democracy Index ranking 156th, below Cuba. And what does Saudi Arabia get from the United States? Billions in arms sales. So when someone tells you America invaded Venezuela because of democracy, I want you to ask one simple question. What's the real difference? Spoiler alert, it's not elections. The difference is 303 billion barrels of oil. The difference is trillions in rare earth minerals. The difference is a country that said no to American oil companies. Sitting 2,000 miles from Houston, and this isn't speculation, I'm about to show you confessions on camera. So here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to show you the paradox that makes no sense, how the country with the most oil on earth ended up with a $4 minimum wage. Then I'm going to play you the clip that should have ended the democracy narrative years ago. But here's where it gets interesting. Oil is only part of the prize. Underneath Venezuela lies something that might matter even more in the 21st century. Then we'll look at the chessboard. 3 superpowers, 1 prize, Russian nuclear bombers, 2,000 miles from Miami. And finally, I'll show you the moment the democracy narrative collapsed entirely, when the US captured Maduro and then told the Nobel Peace Prize winner to take a seat. Let's start with a question that should be impossible to answer. Venezuela sits on 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. Do the math. That's more than Saudi Arabia at 267 billion, more than Iran at 209 billion, more than Iraq at 145 billion. Venezuela has more oil than any country on earth, by a lot. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. 82% of Venezuelans live in poverty. The minimum wage is $4 per month. A basic food basket costs $539. Let that sink in. The country with the largest oil reserves in human history can't feed itself. Imagine finding a gold mine under your house,
but you still cannot afford groceries. That is Venezuela.
And it gets worse. In the late 1990s, Venezuela pumped 3.5 million barrels a day. By 2020, 500,000. That's an 85% collapse. In 2020, for the first time in a century, Venezuela had 0 active oil rigs. 0. The oil giant forgot how to pump oil. The Paraguana refinery, once the largest in the world, now operates at 10% capacity. The infrastructure hasn't been updated in 50 years. So how does the richest oil nation on earth forget how to pump oil? The gold mine is there, but the equipment is broken, the workers fled, and the people who run it? They've been selling the gold and pocketing the money. Now here's the irony that nobody talks about. While Maduro preached socialism and railed against American imperialism, the US dollar quietly conquered Venezuela without a single shot fired. Venezuelans call it de-bolivarización, the death of their own currency. Out of sheer desperation, ordinary Venezuelans abandoned the bolivar for dollars The socialist revolution's currency was defeated by the very empire it opposed. But here's what doesn't make sense. If Venezuela is such a disaster, if the oil industry is collapsing, if the people are starving, if the currency is worthless, why are three superpowers fighting over it? Why did the US just invade? What do they know that we don't? Turns out they told us. They just hoped we weren't paying attention. In January 2019, the United States recognized opposition leader Juan Guaidó as Venezuela's legitimate president. The official line, democracy, human rights, the usual. But then John Bolton, Trump's own national security advisor, went on Fox Business and said this: "We're in conversation with major American companies now. I think we're trying to get to the same end result here. It will make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela." Read that again. It will make a big difference to the United States economically, not to Venezuelan democracy. To American economics? They said the quiet part out loud. Venezuela's foreign minister responded on Twitter, "Confession at Ambi John Bolton confirms that the coup is about oil." But wait, it gets worse. Bolton wrote a book, 500 pages. And by the way, Venezuela is mentioned more than 300 times. 300 times. There's a 35-page chapter called Venezuela Libre that details the coup planning. Here's what Bolton wrote. Trump had great interest in Venezuela's oil fields. Trump insisted we should take the oil in Venezuela after ousting Maduro. Trump reportedly said Venezuela is really part of the United States. And my personal favorite, that it would be cool to invade. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin was talking to oil company executives about protecting U.S. oil and gas assets in Venezuela. But the real confession came later. July 2022. Bolton goes on CNN and says this: "As someone who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but in other places, it takes a lot of work." When asked for an example, he pointed to Venezuela, the former national security advisor, on CNN admitting to planning coups. And nobody blinked. Now, if you think this is unique, let me show you the pattern. General John Abizaid, former head of U.S. Central Command, said this about Iraq. Of course it's about oil. Oil fuels a lot of geopolitical moves. British government documents reveal detailed plans to exploit oil opportunities in post-Saddam Iraq, drafted before the invasion. Guatemala, 1954. United Fruit Company. Chile, 1973. Copper. Iraq, 2003. Oil. Libya, 2011. Oil. The playbook doesn't change, only the target. So we knew. We've known for years. But somehow the democracy narrative kept playing until January 2026, when they stopped pretending altogether. But here's the thing, oil is only part of the story. What most people miss is that Venezuela is sitting on something that might matter even more in the 21st century. And let me show you what's really underneath. This is the Arco Minero, the mining arc, 111,000 square kilometers. That's larger than Cuba, 12% of Venezuela's entire territory. And according to the Venezuelan government, it contains $2 trillion in mineral wealth. We're talking about Latin America's largest gold reserves, an estimated 7,000 tons, significant coltan deposits. If you don't know what coltan is, check your pocket. It's in every smartphone, every laptop, every piece of military electronics. Rare earth elements, the stuff that makes electric vehicles work, that powers renewable energy systems, that goes into defense technology. And potentially 20% of the world's bauxite reserves. This isn't just about oil anymore. There are 3 prizes in Venezuela. 1, 303 billion barrels of oil, the largest on Earth. 2, $2 trillion in minerals, gold, coltan, rare earths. 3, geography. 2,000 miles from Houston, Caribbean access. Control all 3, and you control the 21st century. But here's why this matters right now. Pick up your phone. That phone has coltan in it, rare earth elements, Minerals that make the screen work, the battery last, the processor think. Where do those minerals come from? China controls 91% of global rare earth refining. 91%. And in April 2025, Beijing imposed export restrictions on rare earths to the United States. That's not a trade dispute. That's a chokehold. Venezuelan deposits, they're the potential Western Hemisphere alternative. Whoever controls these minerals controls the future. But there's a problem. The mining arc isn't actually controlled by the Venezuelan government. It's controlled by everyone else. Colombian ELN guerrillas operate freely in the mining zones. Sex trafficking, child labor, mercury poisoning, all documented. The Venezuelan military was sent to stop illegal mining. Here's the twist: the military now runs the mining operations. Criminal syndicates, not corporations, extract the wealth. So you have $2 trillion in minerals, controlled by guerrillas and corrupt generals, sitting in a failed state, 2,000 miles from Houston. If you're an American strategist, that's not a problem. That's an opportunity. And that brings us to the geography. Venezuela has 2,800 kilometers of Caribbean coastline. It controls sea lanes between North and South America. But here's the number that matters: roughly 2,000 miles from Houston. That's closer than Saudi Arabia. The US Gulf Coast has $100 billion worth of refinery infrastructure. And here's the thing: those refineries were purpose-built to process Venezuelan heavy crude. Think of it like coffee machines designed for one specific bean. You can use other beans, but you'll never get the same output. As one analyst put it, most US refineries were constructed to process Venezuela's heavy oil, and they're significantly more efficient when they're using Venezuelan oil compared to American oil. So the prize isn't just oil, it's not just minerals. It's the closest major oil reserve to American refineries. Refineries that were literally designed for Venezuelan crude. Without it, they're less efficient, less profitable, less American. Geography is destiny. 3 superpowers understand this perfectly. China already bet $62 billion on it. Russia put nuclear bombers 2,000 miles from Miami, and the United States just invaded. Let me show you how the board was set. Between 2007 and 2016, China pumped $62.3 billion into Venezuela. Let me put that in context. That's 53% of all Chinese lending to Latin America. More than Beijing lent to any other single country on Earth. The structure was simple: China Development Bank loans repaid through PDVSA oil shipments. Today, 80 to 95% of Venezuelan oil exports flow to China. In 2023, Venezuela was upgraded to an all-weather strategic partnership, the second highest designation China gives to any Latin American nation. Chinese state-owned companies, CNPC, Sinopec, CNOOC, operate joint ventures across Venezuelan oil fields. Another $700 million has been approved for gold, coltan, and rare earth extraction in the Arco Minero. But here's the twist nobody expects. You've heard of debt trap diplomacy, right? The story goes, China lends money to poor countries, waits for them to fail, then seizes their ports and airports. It's a good narrative. There's just one problem. In Venezuela, China is the one trapped. When Caracas couldn't pay, China granted a 2-year moratorium in 2016. Additional grace periods in 2020. And here's the thing, China did not seize Venezuelan assets. Scholars who've studied this call it a lender's trap for Beijing. The debt trap trapped the lender. China bet $62 billion on Venezuela. Venezuela still owes 20 to 25 billion money Beijing may never see again, unless, of course, someone else takes over, someone who might honor the debts or renegotiate them. Do the math. While China was writing checks, Russia was shipping weapons. Since 2005, Moscow has provided over $4 billion in arms to Venezuela, 24 Su-30 Mk-2 fighter jets, S-300 VM air defense systems, the same systems that protect Moscow, 100,000 AK-103 assault rifles, T-72 tanks. In July 2025, a new Kalashnikov ammunition factory opened in Venezuela. But here's what should keep American strategists awake at night. In 2008 and again in 2018, Russian Tu-160 bombers, nuclear-capable, conducted training flights from Venezuelan bases, nuclear-capable bombers, 2,000 miles from Miami. In 2019, roughly 100 Russian military personnel were deployed to Caracas. Before U.S. sanctions forced their exit, Rosneft, Russia's state oil company, handled 80% of Venezuelan oil trade. They earned up to $120 million monthly from discounted crude, and in December 2024, Venezuela approved a 15-year extension of Russian oil field joint ventures through 2041. Russia put nuclear-capable bombers in America's backyard. They armed Venezuela to the teeth. They locked in oil deals for the next 2 decades. This isn't about supporting socialism. This is about planting a flag. And the United States noticed Roosevelt Roads, a Cold War naval base in Puerto Rico, roughly 500 miles from Venezuela, was reactivated. The Pentagon deployed a nuclear submarine. Fighter jets. The Ford Carrier Strike Group. In December 2025, Trump announced what he called the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Translation: the Western Hemisphere is America's sphere of influence, and Venezuela was about to learn what that meant. For months the pieces moved into place, and then on January 3rd, 2026, they struck. A quick question for the comments. If you were sitting in Beijing right now, $62 billion on the line, your client state just got invaded, what's your move? Let me know below. If you're enjoying this cheerful breakdown of great power competition over the world's largest oil reserves, do me a favor and destroy that like button. It genuinely helps. So, 3 superpowers circled Venezuela like vultures: China with its checkbook, Russia with its bombers, America with its carrier groups. And through all of it, we were told this was about democracy. So when the US finally removed Maduro, surely they backed the Nobel Peace Prize winner, the woman who risked her life for Venezuelan democracy, right? Let me show you something. If the United States cares about democracy in Venezuela, let's apply a simple test. Let's play a game. I'll describe a country. You guess which one. Country A holds elections. Disputed, yes, but elections happen. Country B, absolute monarchy, no elections ever, the king's word is law. Country A gets crippling sanctions and military invasion. Country B gets billions in arms sales and state visits. And which is which? Country A is Venezuela. Country B is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia ranks 156th on the Democracy Index. That's below Cuba. So what's the difference? The difference isn't democracy. The difference is alignment, access, cooperation. Venezuela said no to American oil companies. Saudi Arabia said yes. That's it. That's the entire difference. Now let me tell you about Maria Corina Machado. In October 2023, she won the opposition primary in a landslide. She was the face of Venezuelan democracy. Maduro's courts barred her from running, a 15-year disqualification. She didn't flee. She stayed in Venezuela, in hiding, organizing resistance at personal risk. In 2025, she won the Nobel Peace Prize for, and I'm quoting, her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy. So when the United States finally removed Maduro, surely they backed Machado, the Nobel laureate, the democracy icon, the woman who literally won a prize for fighting for democracy. Here's what Trump said. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. He dismissed her. Instead, he suggested working with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, a Maduro loyalist, for transition. The woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize for fighting for Venezuelan democracy was told to take a seat by the country that claimed to be fighting for Venezuelan democracy. Opposition Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar explained the real priority. Venezuela for the American oil companies will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. The goal was never installing democracy. The goal was installing access. And, if you need more proof, look at who they sent. In 2019, the Trump administration appointed a special representative for Venezuela. His job? Restore democracy. His name? Elliot Abrams. Let me tell you about Elliot Abrams. El Mozote, 1981. Salvadoran military massacred over 900 civilians, mostly women and children. Elliot Abrams, then Assistant Secretary of State, called the reports not credible and communist propaganda. Iran-Contra. Abrams pleaded guilty to withholding information from Congress about illegal arms sales. Venezuela 2002. Abrams had advanced knowledge of the coup attempt against Hugo Chavez. When Abrams testified before Congress in 2019, Representative Ilhan Omar said this: "I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful. This is the man they chose to restore democracy. A man who covered up massacres, who helped plan coups, who lied to Congress. If you're confused, you're not paying attention. The goal was never democracy. The goal was access. And if you want to understand how this system really works, follow the money." Venezuela's oil wealth didn't disappear. It was stolen by everyone. Transparencia Venezuela has documented $70 billion in judicial cases across 26 countries. 26 countries. Tracking stolen Venezuelan money. Opposition estimates put embezzlement at $87 billion, $27 billion from the Ministry of Food, $25 billion from electricity, $22 billion from unfinished transportation projects, $11 billion directly from PDVSA. Former Planning Minister Jorge Giordani, a Chavez loyalist, estimated the total at $300 billion. But let me make this concrete. Alejandro Andrade, former National Treasurer of Venezuela, he admitted to receiving over $1 billion in bribes. $1 billion for one person. When U.S. authorities seized his assets, they found a mansion in Wellington, Florida, horse country, 60 show horses. These weren't pets. These were million-dollar competition horses, 3 private jets, a yacht, $1 billion from a country where people eat from garbage cans. Sentence, 10 years. His horses auctioned off. His country, still starving, Alex Saab, identified as Maduro's frontman, allegedly transferred $350 million through shell companies, was awarded a $4.5 billion PDVSA contract through intermediaries, extradited to the U.S. in 2021, released in a prisoner swap in December 2023, and immediately appointed Minister of Industry. The man accused of stealing billions made a cabinet minister. And then there's the drug money. In March 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Maduro himself, not for election fraud, not for human rights, for leading a drug cartel. The Cartel of the Suns implicates 123 current and former senior Venezuelan officials. 200 to 250 tons of cocaine flow through Venezuela every year. There's a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head right now. But here's the part that's almost impressive. Imagine a ghost ship. It's loading Venezuelan oil at the Jose terminal. But if you check the GPS, it shows the ship 500 nautical miles away. Sitting still, doing nothing. That's GPS spoofing. There are 1,900 tankers in this dark fleet. They use false flags, registering in countries that don't ask questions. They do ship-to-ship transfers at sea in international waters where nobody's watching. And then the oil appears in India, or Turkey, or the UAE, cleaned, laundered, untraceable. Only 40% of these ships have been sanctioned, the other 60% still sailing. So, while the official story was democracy versus dictatorship, the real story was simpler. Everyone was getting paid. The Boliburguesia, the cartels, the dark fleet operators, the intermediaries, and the Venezuelan people. They were the only ones who weren't. 7.7 million of them fled. That's 20% of the entire population. Which brings us to now, let me show you who's winning. November 2022. Chevron receives a special sanctions exemption, not for humanitarian reasons, for oil. Today, Chevron produces 25% of Venezuela's total output. And here's the key detail. The license is structured so, quote, cash flows do not directly benefit PDVSA. Translation: Chevron extracts the oil. Chevron keeps the money to pay down debts Venezuela owes to Chevron. White House advisor Stephen Miller explained the philosophy. American sweat, ingenuity, and toil created the oil industry in Venezuela. Its tyrannical expropriation was the largest recorded theft of American wealth and property. Translation: they're coming to take it back. Now let me show you who's losing. 7.7 million Venezuelans have fled. That's 20% of the entire population. This is the second largest displacement crisis in the world after Syria. 82% live in poverty, 53% in extreme poverty. 89% of households cannot afford a basic food basket. The healthcare system collapsed. 70% lost access to medical care. Minimum wage, $4 a month. Food basket, $539 a month, while superpowers fought over what was underground. 7.7 million people fled what was happening above it. And here's the thing, this isn't unique. Guatemala, 1954. United Fruit Company didn't like land reform. The US installed a dictator. Iran, 1953. British Petroleum didn't like nationalization. The US and UK installed a Shah. Chile, 1973. American companies didn't like socialism. The US backed a coup. Iraq, 2003, oil. Libya, 2011, oil. Venezuela, 2026, oil, minerals. Geography. The playbook doesn't change, only the target. But Venezuela isn't the end of the story. It's a preview. Venezuela isn't unique. It's a preview. The resources that power the 21st century, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, even water, they're concentrated in a handful of places. Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, the Congo, and those places will face the same choice Venezuela faced. Play ball or be replaced. Let me make this personal. The phone in your pocket, the gas in your car, the electric vehicle you might buy next year. All of it comes from somewhere. All of it is controlled by someone. And when that someone says no, you've seen what happens. So here's what I want you to take from this. The next time you hear about a foreign crisis, a dictator who must go, a people who need liberation, ask yourself one question. What's underneath? Check the resources, check who controls them, check who wants to control them. The pattern exists, you just have to look. We started with a confession. We're going to be taking a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground. 303 billion barrels of oil. $2 trillion in minerals, the closest major reserve to American refineries. The dictator was just in the way. Quick question for the comments. After everything you've seen, the confessions, the betrayals, the pattern, what happens next? Let me know below. If this changed how you see the news, subscribe. We do this every week. The stuff they hope you won't look up,